So everyone, I'm Dylan McDowell. I'm the Executive Director of NCEL, and I'm so happy to see you all. Thank you so much for being here for this legislator briefing. I see familiar faces and new faces, and we're really excited to talk with you about some of the resources we have to offer and hear from you and during the Q&A section, and really just get ready for another incredible year that we know all of you are going to make possible on environmental policy. I've had the privilege of being with NCEL for about 9 years now, and I moved into the executive director role this past year. So great to be working with all of you. And I'm so excited to get to meet our wonderful program managers that lead all the policy work. So you've probably seen some of our names via email. Today, you'll have a chance to have a face to that. And we're going to start by introducing you to NCEL's president, State Senator Chris Lee from Hawaii. Some of you may know Senator Lee, who's been an international leader on climate efforts, leading the first 100% renewable and many other policies. And we're going to let Senator Lee talk a little bit about his experience with NCEL. But first, Taylor, if you could go to the next slide for me. I will just give you the basics here is that we are a nationwide network of over 1,200 legislators. We serve as a connector to help you talk with your peers across the country, connect with experts and resources. We often say that we are remote environmental staff. We know at the state level that oftentimes you're limited with staff capacity, time, and we want to be that resource for you to know what's happening across the country, what are those best practices and policies. And we really were created by and for state legislators more than 25 years ago. And to this day, we keep that as a core part of our value to make sure we're hearing from you, listening, and being responsive to your needs. We have a national forum, regional events, and state events as well. We'll dive into all of those, but first I'm going to turn it over to NCEL President Chris Lee, and then you'll hear from the rest of us after. So Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Dylan. Hey, everybody. My name's Chris Lee. I'm a state senator in Hawaii. I've been in the legislature for about 15 years or so, but it's been quite an honor to recently start serving as president of NCEL with a group of folks who've been just so incredible over the years, helping us create policy that has actually been implemented and creating change across the board. NCEL is an organization unlike many others. It's made by and for elected legislators. So when you talk to each other, you know you're talking to peers, you know you've both been in the trenches, and you can understand problems in ways that you're not going to get from advocacy or from folks from sort of outside that key role that we all find to be so unique and so difficult sometimes to connect with. But NCEL is also an organization that doesn't just do webinars. We're not just there. It's actually something that's been around for decades now and has been sort of the secret sauce behind the scenes, helping states, helping colleagues, helping folks from coast to coast and beyond actually implement policy and create stuff that is meaningful and can be implemented and replicated and share best practices and so forth. It's something that you really can't put a value to until you actually are in session and realize you need help with something. You got policy, you can't quite figure out how to message it, how to frame it, you can't quite figure out how to get stakeholders engaged. And that's where this comes in, because we have a network of folks that I've been so honored to get to know over the years that have been working on all these different issues. This started actually one of the most significant policies that originated a couple decades ago now behind the scenes was vehicle emissions, which actually came out of a bill first sponsored by one of NCEL's first members, California Senator Fran Pavley, that led to other states adopting similar emissions, which forced Congress to actually step in and create nationwide standards. So you can see the impact that states can have, and coordinating to do that is something that is so valuable because we can move the country together. Right now, as Dylan had mentioned, one of the things that I've been working on recently was 100% clean energy. Hawaii was the first state we worked through our network with states like Colorado and Washington and so on to help replicate those policies. And it's not just clean energy that we tend to focus on. There's a lot of work going on climate, on pesticides and chemical pollution, plastics, conservation, oceans, and on and on. There's something for everybody because no matter where you're at, someone else is already working on this, and there's a playbook and lessons learned. And that's what's really valuable from the network, being able to collaborate and not basically try and reinvent the wheel every time you're trying to figure out what to do. Other really important things that I've found valuable over the years on education, having a dedicated team of researchers and experts in their policy fields at NCEL that can provide information, provide background, basically do a lot of the digging behind the scenes that you need, because a lot of states, as I'm sure you know, don't have staff, don't have expertise in-house, don't have the capacity to do a lot of that, especially in a pinch when you've got a hearing coming up and there's a bill and you're really trying to get to the bottom of something or answer somebody's question. I'm actually talking to you right now from Indonesia. I'm here with a State Department program, and it's so valuable because we're working in partnership with so many other places that are doing similar sorts of policy work, not only in the United States, but around the world. We've actually sent delegations to the annual United Nations COP. We've had regional events where legislators get together within their own states or within their own sections of the country. And now we're looking at trying to be able to amplify that and get more people engaged and send more people to places where they can actually experience in real time and in person the kinds of policy, the kinds of change that is happening. So you can take back with you some of the best practices and really implement that as it makes sense in your areas. It's really all about that experience and doing it together, collaborating beyond state borders. So it's been a great ride. This has been one of the most valuable tools that I've experienced in my 15 years in office. And I really encourage everybody to take advantage, because there's a network out there of folks who've been working on very similar things for a long time. There's new ways to do things, but if you do it better when we work together. So that's really the bottom line. So thanks for getting involved. Thanks for showing up today to participate, and hopefully open a door to something that could be really valuable, because at the end of the day, we're all in this together. We're trying to help create a better country and a better future. So good luck. Thanks, Dylan.
Thank you so much, Senator. It's always a pleasure to work with you and to have you be here as a resource for NCEL, a leader for NCEL, and a leader in your state. I want to quickly note, I see some comments here. Unfortunately, the chat is not working correctly. We're trying to figure that out, but for the time being, please use the Q&A feature to ask any questions or make any comments. Apologies for that. Always some little technical snafus, but we're excited to hear from you during Q&A and throughout the session. I'll go through a few other resources that we have. So as we mentioned, or as Senator Lee mentioned, we have a lot of resources on our website, things that are available for you, and we're always adding more. Our website, which we renovated about 2 years ago, is an opportunity for you to explore policies and bill tracking. You can go through and figure out case studies, bill spotlights, and more. Let's go to the next slide here. We have a variety of issues covered on the website, so you can explore by those, but you can also reach out to us directly. If there's a topic you're wondering about and you don't see it there, please reach out to us and we'll see what we can find. Chances are we have something, or at the very least, we can connect you with someone in our vast network of experts and advocates that we work with, or we can help do a bill search for you and direct you to our bill tracking map. Our bill tracking map always has the up-to-date information on what states are working on a variety of topics. Going to the next slide. We also have a resource center. And so here you can find fact sheets, briefing books, and other topics and resources that we've covered or we created. And I'll just say that, one of our driving principles is to make things short and concise for you as busy state lawmakers. We know that you often don't have a lot of time to read through really dense materials. And so our goal is to try and create that really concise opportunity for you to understand a topic and then link out to more information. So you can figure out where are those really good in-depth resources. But we try and keep it at high level and to a point, but then also provide you with a lot of very actionable policy resources. So you'll find policy option sheets, examples from other states, case studies, etc. So you as a lawmaker can figure out how to take some of these ideas and implement them in your own area. Going to the next slide here, we have our national forum. I mentioned we have activities throughout the year. Our biggest event is our national forum. It's usually right before NCSL. And so this year we'll be in Louisville, Kentucky, August 1st through 3rd. And we'll have well over 100 legislators joining us, and we'll cover a whole range of environmental topics. So everything you're about to hear about from our program managers, that'll come up as part of the forum. And more importantly, it is an opportunity for you to connect from your peers across the country, for you to get inspired, for you to learn new ideas to take back to your state. We already have our national forum page up online, so you can go there, find more information, and registration will open in the new year. I want to quickly touch on some work we're doing to help connect you all with federal initiatives. So as I'm sure all of you are aware, there's been some pretty monumental policies passed, including the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Our team is working to make sure that we help you understand where those opportunities intersect with what you're doing at the state level, trying to keep you up to date on large initiatives, things like America the Beautiful Challenge, Justice 40, and then also connecting you with members of Congress, agencies, White House, etc. And so there's really a lot of opportunities, and we want to make sure you as legislators can raise your voice and speak to these federal agencies, to Congress, to the White House, and help them understand some of the priorities, and also lift up successes you're doing, and make sure those federal programs and processes and whatnot come down to the state level and are as effective as possible based on your leadership. So with that, we're going to start moving into our program areas. We divide our work into 4 programs. We have climate and energy, conservation, environmental health, and oceans. Now, I want to note that environmental justice is something that we embed in all of our program areas very intentionally. Rather than having it be siloed as its own, it's something that we really think about as a principal and core facet of all of the work we do. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our first program manager, Ava Gallo, who leads our climate and energy work, to talk about some of the incredible opportunities underway and ways to get involved. Ava, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our briefing. As Zone mentioned, my name is Ava Gallo, and I am the Climate and Energy Manager. It's so nice to see so many familiar names in the chat, in the participant list, and some new folks as well. Welcome. And so in climate and energy, we really cover a pretty wide umbrella of policies, but we have 3 main areas that we cover, including the power sector, where we talk about transmission, interconnection, renewable energy, permitting, siting, all things under the grid umbrella. Transportation, both electric vehicles and also public transit and complete streets, electric bicycles, et cetera, et cetera. And then also buildings, we talk about building performance standards, appliances, energy efficiency, and really anything that includes decarbonizing the emissions from buildings. But many topics in between those big 3 is what we cover as well. And so on the next slide, just looking at a couple more specific ways that we can support your work. So we often, as Senator Lee mentioned, have regional events. And most recently, we were in Santa Fe working with legislators in the Southwest on transmission policy options. And when we have those regional events, it's really great that we can have speakers that can provide policy options that are tailored to the specific concerns that you face in your own region. As we know, policy options are not a one-size-fits-all solution. In the climate energy program, we also have lots of opportunities to engage with federal agencies, whether that be through briefings, but we also have opportunities for sign-on letters, like our transmission planning rule sign-on letter to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, in support of that transmission planning rule. We also had a sign-on letter to the Department of Energy to have restrictions to make sure that their hydrogen tax credit are actually supporting clean hydrogen projects, and some other resources that we have on hydrogen hubs that we will share with you all in the chat, I think, or in the Q&A is what's happening. And then we also have opportunities to do personalized research on anything under the climate and energy umbrella. And that we do all year long. On anything that comes up, you can email us and ask a question and we'll do research for you. But also the Climate and Energy is hosting personalized office hours every Wednesday afternoon from 1 to 5 p.m. Eastern. So we'll be dropping that Calendly in the chat. And I hope that you can sign up if you have some questions before we get into the 2024 session. And then just on the next chat, we're going to cover our working groups and some upcoming opportunities. So in climate energy, we have our bold decarbonization working group. I know that I see some familiar names in the list that are part of that group. We typically meet once a month on the first Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern time. And we cover topics wide and vast in the climate and energy umbrella. And so we have folks that self-identify as climate champions hearing about topics like extreme heat, transportation planning standards, hydrogen, green banks, really everything under the sun. And our next meeting will be on Friday, January 5th, and that one will be open to the public. And anyone who wants to join and get a taste of what bold decarbonization looks like, and it will be on climate finance in the states, which is a very timely topic. I know many of you are facing anti-ESG legislation in your states, so that'll help you both pass proactive legislation and be aware of some anti legislation as well. And so with that, I will go ahead and pass back to Dylan. Thanks so much, and looking forward to seeing your names in my inbox asking for some help soon.
Thank you, Ava, and I appreciate that great overview of all the work you're doing. Next, we'll hear from Kate Burgess, who leads our conservation program.
Thanks, Dylan. Good morning, everybody. Good to see some familiar faces as well. Thank you for being here, and also just generally for your service and your leadership on environmental issues. Not to wax poetic here, but I did recently look up the etymology of the word conserve. I'm NCEL's conservation program manager, and I found that the most common root of the word actually comes from the concept of maintenance in good condition. So I thought, Merriam-Webster, we will raise you one, because at NCEL, our goal in working with you all is not just good condition of nature, but great. Just given the swiftness and the endurance of the twin biodiversity and climate crises, we're aiming for net positive results for flora and fauna, humans included. And so that comes to our main focuses. On land, we work with leaders like you all who take on legislation to set 30 by 30 goals, incentivize private landowners to keep their space habitable for important species, fund the creation of wildlife corridor action plans that reduce wildlife vehicle collisions and allow migratory species the ability to thrive, among others. We also work on water issues, namely through drought resilience, wetland protection, especially in a post-Sackett world, establishing riparian buffers, and codifying the right to clean air, water, and a healthy environment. In terms of wildlife, this year marks the 50th anniversary of the Federal Endangered Species Act, but states are really important and crucial in supplementing protections at the state level through their State Endangered Species Act as well. We also work on the makeup and structure of wildlife agencies to expand authority, access, and funding, and govern in a way that is inclusive and equitable, not just for species, but for the constituents in the state that they represent. We address pollinator protection and pesticide restriction. And I learned recently that pollinators are responsible for 1 out of every 3 bites of food. So it's an issue that touches all of us. And we also work on combating the massive ecological and economic turmoil caused by invasive species like lionfish, as well as wildlife trafficking and disease, in order to prevent future pandemics, because if you're with me, I think 1 was enough in our lifetimes. And then we also work on outdoor engagement. We work with y'all to promote quality outdoor and nature-based experiences for everyone. Right now, 1 in 3 Americans lack access to nearby outdoor spaces. But we know that experiencing joy in the outdoors can lead to immensely positive impacts on mental health and well-being. And so we're working with lawmakers to promote outdoor curriculum in schools and lower barriers to access, especially for communities of color, veterans, and as a tool for promoting healthy children. And then lastly, but not least, we recently launched a partnership with an incredible Native-led organization called Native Americans in Philanthropy. And that partnership is multifold in scope. So first, our priority is just helping states understand the unique legal responsibilities between states and tribal nations. And we're also working to share guidance about long-term relationship building with tribes and offer policy options in support of, for example, returning land back, ocean back, co-management and co-stewardship when it benefits tribal nations, and options that prioritize tribal sovereignty and self-determination in environmental decision-making. So a massive shout out to Logan, Grant, and Justin for all of their work and the conservation team on their portfolio. And next, thinking about the ways that we can help on the next slide, I like to say that our assistance is iterative, and so that we are open to finding new ways to support you all. And we also have some strategies that have been tried and tested. So for example, this was a really fun year. We hosted dine and learn sessions. We tested e-bikes by rivers, paddled to celebrate outdoor access, and shared brews at the urban foot of several mountain ranges over conservations that span from biodiversity to drought resilience. We also provide one-on-one assistance. We really like to provide bespoke support in the form of state-specific research, talking points, legislative feedback, and state-by-state statute comparisons to see where your state ranks in terms of others, in terms of how strong biodiversity and land protections are. And then we also do resource development. You may have heard me talk about our recent State Endangered Species Act report if you have about 5 hours to kill and want something very thought-provoking. And so we like to put together all sorts of resources, from talking points to fact sheets to reports, to help provide a menu of policy options for all of you in your conservation interests. And also say that those come from a variety of trusted science and knowledge systems as well. And then lastly, looking forward, we have some working groups and upcoming events that I wanted to highlight. Right now, conservation has 3 working groups, one on habitat connectivity, one on pollinator protection and pesticide restriction, and then one on outdoor engagement. And some upcoming opportunities that I really want to flag, 2 are this week. So this Thursday, on December 7th, we have one of the leading experts in the country on carnivore and coexistence briefing, Dr. Adrian Treves, who has a focus on large carnivores in the US, which may not seem relevant to everybody, but as climate pushes large carnivores closer to urban areas, it's going to be an issue that persists in terms of how do we figure out how to coexist with these species. So highly recommend you come to that. We also have an outdoor working group on mental health and the benefits and values of mental health in the outdoors and how to promote that within your state on Friday. And our pesticide and pollinator working group coming up a week from this Friday. So we hope to see you there, and thank you again for all the work. With that, I'll pass back to Dylan.
Thank you, Kate. And I appreciate everything you're doing to lead the conservation work, and especially with all the fun outings that we've had in the last year, like you pointed out. Looking forward to more of those coming up in 2024. Next, we'll hear from Mara Herman about our environmental health program. Mara, over to you.
Hey everyone, thank you for taking the time to join us today. Great to see some familiar names in the chat. Like Dylan mentioned, I'm Mara Herman, the Environmental Health Program Manager here at NCEL. I'm based just outside of Detroit, Michigan, and I use she, her pronouns. The environmental health team's mission is to create healthy people and healthy environments by eliminating environmental threats to human health through public policy shaping. The team, which includes myself, Julia Meltzer, and Angela Yuan, works towards this mission by empowering state legislators like yourself to address the ways environmental threats impact human health and advance clean and healthy environments through equitable policy centered on justice and inclusion. The main policy focuses of the environmental health program include tracking the environmental justice policy landscape and identifying opportunities for legislators to better support environmental justice policies like environmental justice screenings, plastic pollution and zero waste policies. This includes the entire plastics life cycle from petrochemical extraction, plastic and source reduction, material recycling, and identifying false solutions like plastic burning, toxic chemicals and pollutants such as PFAS and flame retardants, and the cumulative impacts exposure to toxic pollutants can have. And last, but certainly not least, sustainable agriculture and water quality policies such as flood resilience, nutrient pollution, and soil health. So the ways in which that we can help legislators through in-person events like state visits and our annual Mississippi River Tour, which includes stops in different states along the Mississippi River. The photo on the right is actually from a river tour event that took place in Iowa. Our policy briefings, which are opportunities for members to participate in virtual meetings with experts on various environmental health topics, and regional collaboration. We organize events for legislators to meet with others to discuss regional topics of interest. For example, you can see a photo from one of our Mississippi River Legislative Caucus forums. That's an annual event that takes place in the fall. So I mentioned virtual meetings. We host on different topics pertaining to environmental health. We have our plastic pollution and toxic chemicals working groups that offer opportunities to hear from topic experts, learn more about policy resources, and create space for discussions. Our plastic pollution working group has a meeting this upcoming Monday, December 11th at 3:00 p.m. Eastern Time. This policy briefing will focus on zero waste and how source reduction and waste diversion is shaping up in the United States. We'll also hear more about opportunities for states and policy options to decrease methane emissions while also creating jobs and supporting communities. If you're interested in joining our plastic pollution working group or this particular briefing, please feel free to reach out to myself or our zero waste coordinator, Julia Meltzer, for details. We're also working on hosting a webinar on green justice zones in early 2024. Green justice zones can leverage community-based leadership to further health equity, increase quality of life, and bolster climate resilience. So we'll be sure to share more details pertaining to this webinar as become available. And just looking forward to working with all of you through the end of this year and into next year. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dylan.
Thank you, Mara, and thank you for all the work you and your team are doing. I just want to note this Green Justice Zones webinar. What's really exciting about that, I think it's a great example of some of the work we do of trying to help you as legislators understand some of the innovative ideas and approaches that are coming out and some of the newer concepts as well. And Mara and Julia and the team have really been thinking about this as one of those opportunities to help you think about being on the forefront. I think in general, we're also always trying to think about issues that cut across our program areas. So how does environmental health tie into climate resilience, like Mara mentioned, et cetera? And so that's always a tenet of the work we do, and we want to make sure you as legislators have access to all of that. To close out our programs, let's hear from Carlos Ochoa, who leads our Oceans program. And I'll just mention that for those of you that have known NCEL for a while, the Oceans program is relatively new as its own staple. It used to be part of other program areas. And it's been really exciting to have this be a standalone program, provide more focus on the oceans and coasts, and for Carlos to be leading it. So Carlos, over to you.
Thank you, Dylan. I appreciate that intro, and also really glad to be closing out what is an awesome team here of folks who are covering a lot of different topics. So to focus on some of the things with our Oceans program, the first is our offshore energy transition. When it comes to offshore wind, I'm really focused on all varied, unique aspects of the landscape of the industry. So we're not just focused on fixed bottom technology, which is the most common type of turbine that you usually see in places like Block Island or off of Virginia, but also doing a lot of work with floating offshore wind, which is going to be that next phase of offshore wind taking off in deep water areas off of Maine or on the West Coast. And more importantly, too, is trying to focus on the unique regional perspectives that states are trying to focus on with their offshore wind industry. So from the Gulf Coast to the West Coast to the Mid-Atlantic to the Northeast. The other things on offshore energy transition include offshore drilling, and that is inclusive of both the prohibition of offshore drilling, but also the decommissioning of platforms, in addition to assigning responsibility to perpetrators of oil spills. And then the final one, which is still nascent compared to even offshore wind, is tidal energy. But we're already seeing a lot of movement through certain states as public universities to fund research programs for tidal offshore wind. We've seen a lot of that, especially on places like Oregon or even Maine. So just trying to make sure that legislators are being supported in every way, shape, or form with the offshore energy transition. The second focus for this program is coastal conservation. And the first one here is ocean acidification. My focus is really helping on the research and long-term monitoring aspects of ocean acidification. And then also with ocean-based carbon dioxide removal, we're seeing this now as a priority for even federal agencies like NOAA that is using money from the BIL and IRA to advance these kinds of ocean-based carbon solutions. And the other broader ocean climate solutions umbrella as well. And then finally is the blue carbon economy. With regenerative aquaculture, the two things that I'm hearing the most from legislators as an interest in this specific industry are things like regenerative kelp farming or oyster beds. So as the blue economy continues to grow, and for those who are unfamiliar, the blue economy is just a reference to economic activities that are happening in ocean-based areas. And so we're going to see this continue to grow over the years. And so regenerative aquaculture is going to be a central part of this new industry. And then finally is, how do you support states' blue economy efforts? Well, some states like Florida, for example, have already set up offices of the blue economy to support private investment and also public investments in this kind of industry. So these are some of the focuses that I have, and excited to move on to the next slide here. So what are some of the ways that I'm helping these folks in the Ocean program? And I think the first and most important one, the bread and butter of NCEL, is bringing people together, either virtually or in person. And most recently, we had a gathering of legislative leaders from the states of Washington, Oregon, and California for convening at the Seattle Aquarium. Fantastic partner to work with, where we talked about a whole assortment of ocean and coastal issues specific to the West Coast. And some of these pictures here to the right are showing some of the legislators during a lunch break, and then also during one of the guided tours in the Seattle Aquarium's exhibits. Now, I had alluded earlier bringing people together virtually, and that is what I often do with the coastal working groups. So when there are legislators who want to convene and learn more about what's happening On the other side of the coast, let's say if you're a West Coast legislator and you want to know more about what's happening with OA efforts on the East Coast, well, come to a coastal working group meeting. And so these are convening folks, learning from each other, but also bringing in speakers from the federal agencies and Congress, so that there's alignment on state and federal efforts. And then this is very much so in line with this last point, regional collaboration. We want to make sure that states that are in areas where you have a nearby neighbor state that is taking on those same issues, that you are aligning those efforts as much as possible so that we can get the best positive outcomes for the ocean and the coast. Next slide. So our working group is the Coastal Working Group, and that really encompasses all aspects of the work that I do in the Ocean program. And some of our upcoming opportunities is a Ocean as a Climate Solution webinar in January of 2024. And I will also note, just as a fun fact, that that week is the celebration of the anniversary of the 30 by 30 executive order. So trying to line it up so that it's as ocean focused as possible. And then also a regenerative kelp farming briefing book to, again, really provide information to folks with this new industry that is really starting to blossom. And so thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the Ocean program at NCEL. I'll take it back to Dylan.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Appreciate that. And I had the privilege of being there at the Seattle Aquarium event that Carlos mentioned. And we're really hoping to actually do more events like that at aquariums across the country and other really neat venues that are credible partners, beds of research, etc. So there's lots to come, as you can hear, and in our team, we continue to grow, and we're excited to keep expanding our impact. And really what that means is supporting all of you on the environmental work you're doing. I'll invite all the program managers to turn their cameras back on, Senator Lee, and we want to move into a Q&A portion. If for everyone in the audience, if you want to use the Q&A feature to please put any questions you have for our team, anything you're curious about, any issues you are working on or want to know more. I'll get us started with one. We've talked a lot about the work that we do and things that are upcoming, but I'd love for some of you to share successes that you've had in the last year or recent years of working with a legislator. What's a success story where you've worked with a legislator and it's helped lead to positive environmental outcomes? Is there anyone that would like to start?
I can start. So for the past couple of years, we've been really had a focus in the transportation space on e-bikes, and it's been wonderful to see how many folks across the country have been interested in introducing and passing legislation on electric bikes as an opportunity to replace rides from normal vehicles and also as a way for exercise and feel more connected to your community. And we were really excited to have legislators on e-bikes at our national forum this summer as well. So, come to our forum, we have interactive components too. But I was really excited to have legislators from Minnesota at our forum last summer in Denver learn about e-bikes and then include that in their transportation package and incentive for e-bikes and get that passed for this past 2023 session, in which Minnesota had a monumental success of a session. So that was a really great experience to go from interaction and policy to getting something enacted in law.
I just want to chime in on a second on that, because one of the most prominent values of NCEL is that peer-to-peer, legislator-to-legislator collaboration. So focusing on e-bikes as the example, I know we've been working on that in a number of states, but what we realized when we got together and talked with different legislators from different areas of the country that have been working on it is that there's turnkey policy packages, messaging that's been tested in each of these states as bills have moved. And only when we got together did we realize that success looks different in different places. And where a lot of states had failed to pass something because legislators couldn't get it through because there were barriers or pushback or what have you, realizing that changing the narrative by building on what was successful. So for example, not just talking about the climate impacts or energy savings or what have you from that, but rather it's really about cost reduction and learning how to frame these issues with tried and true tested messaging has been so valuable. And you only get that from talking peer to peer with the folks who've sort of been through it in the trenches. I think it was about like 5, maybe 7 years that I was in office before I felt comfortable with the process. And I think these kinds of conversations, like around these issues, can really just help fast track that kind of success, because you're not going at it year after year, learning each time you fail how to do it a little bit better, but rather learning from like 8 or 10 states at a time who've already done this and figure out what pieces work to put into your bill or your effort or engage the right stakeholders. So it's just so phenomenally powerful.
That's such good validation, Senator. Thank you for sharing that. And I think so many people have learned from you as well and been able to take their experiences, take your experience back to their states. Would anyone else like to share any success stories before we move on to other questions?
Yeah, I can share one. If folks haven't been introduced to the concept of a green amendment, it essentially codifies the right to clean air, water, and a healthy environment in a state's constitution, typically the Bill of Rights, so that it puts your access to living healthfully on par with your other civil liberties. And so at this point, nearly 40% of states have either introduced or seriously considered introducing green amendments. And we've been fortunate to be working with nearly all of those states for the last 5 or so years in conjunction with Green Amendments for the Generations, who's been spearheading this movement. And it's just really exciting to see that momentum. What started with 2 bills that passed in 1970, 1971 in Pennsylvania and Montana, nearly 40 years later, passed in New York in 2021, and I know has been making traction in other states like New Mexico, Hawaii as well. And last session, Nevada and Texas also introduced legislation as well, which was exciting to see. So it's really, really been compelling to see how the state momentum has been swelling and how much legislators have been able to learn from one another to kind of refine talking points and get it through different committees. So that's been awesome to see.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Kate. Mara, a question for you. I wanted to ask everyone about working groups. And I know you've done a lot with the plastic pollution working group and been able to integrate that into a big roadmap that we put out. So maybe you could mention that and kind of how the working group has been a learning opportunity for folks, but then also has helped inform some of the resource development we've done.
Sure. Yeah, I can talk a little bit more about that. I think one of the things that's been really beneficial working with members of our plastic pollution working group is getting feedback and understanding more of what really works best for them. What is the information that they're really looking for? What sort of resources can we be providing? So that way all of you can go back to your legislative sessions and do all of the wonderful work that you were already planning on doing, but with a little bit more extra information. So Dylan mentioned a roadmap. We put out our zero waste plastic pollution roadmap, which awesome. Thank you, Taylor, for putting that in the chat. That looks specifically at the entire life cycle of plastics. So from extraction all the way to end of life, and provides different policy options and opportunities throughout the life cycle that state legislators can take on. And a big component of that was actually from feedback from all of you. One of our sessions at our 2022 annual forum was specifically garnering some feedback from all of you. And that was really beneficial to us because it helped us make sure that we were framing the topics in a way that was most useful to you, and in ways that you're actually able to use that information in quick succession, because obviously some legislative sessions go very quickly. So having the information ready to go with model policies and bills that you can take language from is always something that's really helpful. And so we use our plastic pollution working group as a way to continue those conversations, and also look at what are some other ways in which that we can really be helping you when it comes to different topics. Are there things that you're interested in hearing more about that we can be taking a better role in providing information and support?
That's perfect. And Carlos, just to direct a question at you, we talked a little bit about the federal work, and I think that ties into everything people are doing. But in oceans, there's such a unique opportunity to think about what's federally managed versus state managed. Could you talk a little bit? I know at the recent event, we had someone pretty high up at BOEM join us to talk directly to legislators. And you've also helped legislators think about some of the coastal resilience funding and getting their states to apply for that. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about like the op-ed in Rhode Island or some other efforts that legislators might be interested to know as they think about raising their own voice and interacting with federal processes.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dylan, for the question. I'm going to tackle this from 3 angles, and definitely from starting off with the first one you mentioned. We were able to, and we're fortunate enough to have the Pacific director of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM, attend our Seattle convening most recently. And a part of that was to provide these legislators who were there insight into what is going on with BOEM's offshore wind efforts off of the West Coast. And again, they're not just off of California, they're also wind energy areas off of Oregon. And even though there's none right now off of the outer coast of Washington, there's still a lot of synergistic activity along the West Coast about how to support the industry. And so to have the Pacific director there to answer questions about what the feds are thinking about and how the state legislators can take that information back and proactively think about what they can do to advance the industry, that's valuable. The second angle I want to tackle that question on is also through the op-eds you mentioned. So there's two situations, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast, where we made this happen. On the East Coast, we helped author a op-ed that was co-written by Representative David Morales and Senator Alana DiMario. Senator DiMario is the chair of the Environment Committee in Rhode Island, and Representative Morales is, in the past session, he was a first-term member. However, he has been very prolific on environmental issues. And so we wanted to have them work on an op-ed calling for more focus on equitable investment of coastal resilience in the state of Rhode Island. Part of it was to highlight the success of existing funding that was announced by federal agencies, but also trying to nudge them in the direction that is more locally planned and locally thought of investments, and what could really make a lot more effort at the community level. And so to have those state legislators give their thoughts is communicating to the federal government what really should happen. And then the final one is trying to make sure that folks are aware of the resources and funds that are available as a result of the BIL, the IRA, and really just making sure that you guys have the right context to go to, and that we can support you by putting you in front of the right people who know, even in cases, a lot more than we do.
Fantastic. Thank you, Carlos. I want to remind folks to please use the Q&A if you want to ask any questions. It doesn't have to be just directly about NCEL's work, and can be about issues you're curious about. Maybe there's something you've heard about, but you want to know more information. Even if it's just an opportunity for us to follow up with you, we're happy to hear it. And we will follow up with everyone afterwards as well, in case you have other questions that come up. So while you all have another chance here to put some questions in, I want to ask one more to go around through the NCEL staff. And that's really thinking about looking ahead, thinking about what are some of the emerging issues. We've talked about many that have been on the forefront, things that folks maybe have already thought about, or some that are new to folks. But what are some things that are emerging in your issue areas that you're watching right now, that you're seeing states start to take action on, that are good to have on their radar as legislators are looking at the 24 and 2025 legislative sessions? So we can just kind of go reverse, or it goes through the same order there. So Ava, do you mind starting?
I can start. I'm sorry if there's a really loud car alarm, as is life on Zoom. But I think I have two things that I think are really leading the fray right now in my conversations. I'm excited that we have new resources out on hydrogen, because I think that ensuring that we set caps, there's a lot of money from the federal government out there right now on hydrogen. And I think it's really critical to make sure that the hydrogen that we are supporting through federal and state funding is really clean, and you can account for that cleanliness. Actually helps with the local economy, and it isn't just accentuating more fossil fuel production. And so we have great resources on that. And I think hydrogen is a topic that's really critical for next session. And as well, see that both in 2021 and 2023, Colorado and Minnesota have passed legislation on reforming their state departments of transportation to ensure that they have caps on the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that they can accelerate as a part of new projects. And so I've been seeing states across the country get really interested in introducing that legislation as well, to ensure that their state DOTs aren't investing key climate funding into expanding highways, and making sure that agencies are all on the same pages with the really important legislation that you all passed. So if you have any questions on either of those, we have some great resources now, but I'll leave it there.
Fantastic. I see we have some questions coming into the chat or into the Q&A now, which is great. But let's go Kate, Mara, and then Carlos. So really quickly going through some emerging issues you're seeing.
Sure, I'll keep it brief. I would summarize by saying land, water, wildlife, and outdoor access are all climate solutions. And so thinking about the ways that we can address the biodiversity and climate crises concurrently sits in conservation in addition to climate and energy and environmental health and ocean issues. And so thinking about returning land back to tribes, not a new issue, but an important one. Strengthening infrastructure around how to protect wetlands, which are Earth's kidneys, in terms of wildlife. Protecting and conserving keystone relatives like carnivores and bison, and then outdoors as an equity, a mental health, a public safety, and just generally a joy issue. And so I would flag all of those as ones that I don't see going away anytime soon.
Fantastic. Mara?
Yeah, what isn't popping? I guess some that I'll just mention specifically have a lot to do with the tie-ins between plastic pollution and toxics. So I think one of the things to be on the lookout for are things pertaining to non-toxic reuse. That's going to be a big thing. Also looking at poison plastics. So a lot of the different additives that are used in plastic packaging, and also looking at reusables. Bottle bills continue to be something of interest for a lot of states. I think another big thing to be on the lookout for are things pertaining to microplastics and the elimination of intentionally added microplastics. I think that's something that we're going to be seeing a lot more of, and which also has ties to agriculture. Agriculture and toxics are going to be things that are starting to see, but we'll continue to see over the 2024-2025 legislative sessions.
I love that phrase. What isn't popping? It's because it's true. With ocean, if there's a way that I could put it all under one umbrella, or I guess in this case in one boat, is really the blue economy and the ocean as a climate solution. And the two specific things that come to mind that are not going anywhere, are still fairly nascent, but are garnering an enormous amount of funding and attention, are offshore wind, especially with floating offshore wind in deeper waters. And I want to give some folks here an insight into how even floating offshore wind starting to make its way into other parts besides the Gulf of Maine and deeper waters off the West Coast. We're now starting to hear about interest in floating offshore wind off of mid-Atlantic states. I mean, that is something I had never even thought of as an upcoming issue. And then with blue economy, we're talking a focus on regenerative aquaculture, both as a form of supporting the economy, but also something that can serve as a carbon dioxide storage solution, right? Like, I mean, the ability of kelp and oyster beds to soak up carbon and to protect coastal communities. I mean, it is a win-win-win in terms of how these new budding industries are going to be helpful for the climate, helpful for people, and helpful for community.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Carlos. Appreciate, and just thank you all for highlighting, like you said, there's a lot coming up right now, which is exciting. And our team is doing the best possible job to keep track of all of those. And so if you as legislators are hearing about new topics, reach out and we can help you connect on those. We've had 2 questions come into the Q&A, so I want to flag those and I'll open up on the staff. The first is, can any staffers comment or are focused on carbon capture and sequestration? I know Ava and Kate, there's been some conversations about natural and working lands, and especially around kind of carbon sequestration in that sense. So I don't know if either of you want to share anything in that regard.
I'm rapid fire posting some resources and links from the website in the chat. We have a really great resource that our outdoor recreation coordinator Grant worked on and recently published, that's called Outdoor Policy as Nature-Based Solutions. And so I think I will put that in the chat momentarily. But we also have a nature-based solutions issue page on our website that looks at all the legislation we're tracking for this session. That should be updated for the 2024 session relatively soon, but you can still check out 2023 for the moment. And there's some great policy options documents there as well. And then I'm gonna 2-for-1 it with the other question because I think they're very related. But we had Representative Dolan from Vermont ask about climate resilience planning. And so I put in the chat our Southern briefing book, which don't be don't be turned away by the name if you're not a Southern state. It has some really great resources and example legislation that are bipartisan from states that are in the South. And so on the adaptation page of that Southern Briefing book, which I put the link in the chat, it has a lot of really great legislative examples from Florida around the resilience space. So put that in the chat. We'll put the others in the chat. But Kate, if you have anything more specific to add there.
The only thing I would add is that there are certain wildlife policies and measures that can improve and increase an environment's ability to carbon or to sequester carbon. So we've been exploring that with some partners, particularly around buffalo and just grasslands conservation broadly. So happy to share resources if that interests anybody.
Fantastic. And Mara and Carlos, I guess I'll just open it up if either question, if there was anything you wanted to add.
I don't mind quickly jumping in and talking about how, to reiterate that federal agencies, which are steering an enormous amount of funding, specifically NOAA is now steering money towards carbon dioxide removal in marine areas. And so we are hearing a lot about carbon sequestration as a natural carbon capture solution on lands, which is fantastic. We're hearing it less so in terms of just the public narrative, the public discourse with the ocean. And so I think we're going to be seeing that be something that legislators look at more often, and there's funding to support it too. So I'll add that.
Yeah, and just really quickly, I know that part of the question was regarding state revolving funds. That's something that the environmental health team's also looking at. Specifically, we've had an emphasis on the Mississippi River region, but of course we have a lot of materials that we could also share that are also helpful for other states.
Perfect. That is fantastic. I appreciate all of you being so quick with the resources. We've shared a lot in the chat here for everyone attending, and we will be following up with a legislator briefing book. We can follow up with resources that anyone requests, and we'll also have an interest survey as a follow-up. So you can tell us what you're working on or what you're interested in, and we can help connect you with the best possible information. All of our content is.
I was just going to add in addition to that, part of the value of NCEL are these actual convenings where you can meet with your peers and hang out. And in addition to all the baseline info that can be pushed out and the deep dives that the staff can do both behind the scenes and on webinars and directly with your office, the annual forum coming up this summer, where we're going to have everybody fly in, is so invaluable because you can really get, over the course of a few days, a deep dive with staff, plus with all the peers working on it, and build yourself into that network so that you're in the loop, talking with colleagues as their bills advance in their states and hear in real time what's working, what's not. And on top of that, be able to sort of engage in new things that you didn't know were issues that are popping up, like some of the stuff that's being talked about right now. There are scholarships that are available to help folks cover cost to participate. So I totally encourage folks to get involved and make sure that you follow up on that opportunity, because it's probably the most valuable piece of the whole puzzle, that peer-to-peer engagement. Plus the food's usually pretty good. So I'll wrap up there.
That's fantastic, Senator. Thank you. And just to that point, we're always aware and trying to make sure our events are as accessible as possible. And we know that in many states, there's limited resources for attending. And so we do offer travel scholarships and try and make it very easy for folks to attend, because we really want you to be able to come, enjoy the food, and enjoy the learning opportunities to connect with our staff and with each other across the country. With that, I see we have one other question that just came in, so I'll just note that. Do we have resources on electronics recycling program? Mara, do you want to quickly address that?
Yeah, we have some resources that are available on our website. That's also something that if you have specifics around particular electronics, please feel free to reach out to myself or Julia. We'd be happy to put you in touch with some different contacts or some specific information.
Fantastic. Well, I just want to say thank you to everyone that took time to join us today and to learn more about NCEL, whether you're someone that we've worked with before or you're a new face to the network. We're so excited to work with you in the year ahead. We're excited for the follow-up conversations that will come from this. And most importantly, we're excited to be tracking the bills in 2024 and watching all the great work you will be doing. So thank you, Senator Lee, for joining us. Thank you to our program team for talking about the work, and to our entire staff for making this possible. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day and a happy holiday season. Bye all.